Hey YouTube, I'm Ali, welcome to the channel. Now, back in the 80s, when I was considerably thinner and had a little more hair on top, pretty much every board game I played had some form of track around it. There you would roll a die 6, like this massively oversized one, and move your player character or meeple that many spaces. The winner was usually the guy who got to the end the fastest. Talisman is a good example of this, but most famous is probably Snakes and Ladders, as we call it in England, or as you Americans call it, Chutes and Ladders, I think. Now, in Chutes and Ladders, the only thing you could do was roll a die 6, move your piece, and if you landed on a snake or a chute, you would go down, and if you landed on a ladder, you would go up the board. Nowadays, this mechanism of roll and move has fallen out of favour. You don't see it widely used. In this video, I'm going to explain my interpretation of why that is. And importantly, as budding game designers, I'm going to offer some different approaches to the roll and move mechanic, all against a backdrop of Snakes and Ladders, to see whether I can improve it. The aim here is to demonstrate that mechanics can be tweaked and altered and improved all the time, even if they've fallen out of favour. I hope you enjoy the video. If you do, consider subscribing. There, I snuck that in now. Now, to answer the question of why the roll and move mechanic has fallen out of favour, I'm going to refer back to a video I made a little while ago called What's the Secret to a Good Board Game? I think it's called that. I'll link it up here somewhere. I really should know where that is by now, but I don't. Anyway, if you get a chance, have a look. But even if you don't, let me give you a quick summary. In that video, I asked myself 5 fundamental questions about a game, and if I'm happy with the answers, I declare it good. 2 of those questions are pertinent to the roll and move mechanic, and those 2 questions are: am I able to make meaningful decisions in this game? And secondly, are luck and skill balanced in this game? Well, spoiler alert, for Snakes and Ladders, the fact that we use a dice and a dice alone to move our pieces means that the second element of skill and luck being balanced is broken. Snakes and Ladders is a luck-based game. And because it's luck-based, it means I also fail to answer the question of whether I'm making meaningful decisions. I can't make meaningful decisions if I'm totally reliant on luck. And that fundamentally is the problem I think the industry has with roll and move. You roll a dice, you're totally dependent on what the die shows if you have to move that many spaces. There's no choice in the experience, i.e. players don't get to decide what they need to do. And key to design, as I've learned over and over again, is giving players choice. Without choice, you're not going anywhere. That, fundamentally, is why roll and move doesn't work. Okay, so we've established that roll and move is broken. How do we fix it? What alterations can I offer to improve and add choice back to Snakes and Ladders? Well, I'm glad you asked, because firstly, I'm going to start with looking at the board itself. What if I introduce a second track, a second pathway at certain points? If I say roll a land on the number 24 in a normal game of Snakes and Ladders, maybe I'm offered a second path completely. Now, do I choose to take that path or not? Well, I'm adding a choice, and as soon as I add a choice, it means I'm enabling some meaningful decisions to be made, which ultimately improves the game. A good example of this already exists. The Game of Life is a classic roll and move game that I think most people will be familiar with. But there comes a point quite early on where you either decide to travel down a path and get a job immediately, or travel down an educational path and take a little longer to get into the workforce. Both have benefits, but the choice is down to the player. It's still a roll and move mechanism, but I've altered the board to give the player a choice. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to get at here. But what if I don't want to change the board? Well, if I keep the board exactly the same, instead of adding another track, I could add another die. If I add another dice and roll them both during my go, I could be given the choice. Do I take the first dice roll, or do I risk it and roll again to take the second dice roll? In this way, again, I'm introducing a choice. Now, the choice may not be as grand as a separate path on the board, but it is a choice. So, my second suggestion for improving roll and move is to roll more than one die. Now for my third suggestion, I'm going to stick with just the one die. But this time I'm going to add a little bit more flexibility in what I do with the numbers as they appear. When I roll my dice this time, I'm going to suggest that the player can choose to go up to that number of spaces. So for example, if I roll a 4, I don't have to move exactly 4 spaces, I can move up to 4 spaces. Now if that seems a little too simplistic in choice, well, let's spice things up a bit. Let's assume, for example, that if I roll a odd number this time, or if I move rather an odd number of spaces this time, next round everyone has to move an even number of spaces. There's still an element of choice to be made, but it's tempered by a set of external rules, all coming off a single die roll. Now for my fourth suggestion, the choice I'm going to introduce here is one of the die that's used. So far we've been talking about a die 6, either one or multiple of them. But let's assume that we can reach over and grab our D&D dice and instead offer the choice of die size to the player. This is a D20. You probably can't see it, but it's rather nice and heavy because it's made out of metal. You can also get D4s and D8s and D10s and D12s. Obviously they go between 1 and 12. The point I'm putting across here is maybe a choice of the die being used could be introduced into Snakes and Ladders to give that player an edge. If they chose a bigger number, perhaps the number of squares that they roll number of squares they travel up could be greatly enhanced. But perhaps if they do land on a snake, they have to go twice as many down or some factor off. The point is, offering a choice of the die they roll could be another way of introducing choice into the game. And finally, my fifth suggestion is to get rid of the die completely, which I know is a little bit of a cheat when it comes to a roll and move mechanism. But I'm suggesting get rid of the die just for the movement bit. You could still use it, but you're going to use it to generate action or resource points. It's the action or resource points that you'll spend to actually do the movement. Maybe one action point or one resource point will move you one space. Now exactly what does that mechanism look like that enables me to turn a dice roll into the generation of resource or action points? Well, I have no idea. That's a completely separate video. But the point is, I don't have to actively use the die roll here to generate movement. I'm indirectly doing it by generating action points, which potentially could be spent on something else completely. Maybe I give myself an extra life so that if I land on a chute or a snake, I can avoid it. The point is, I'm introducing choice in a different way. Well folks, that's another video over and done with. This was a little bit of fun for me really. I just wanted to share what I thought the reasons were behind roll and move not being used anymore. But more than that, I wanted to share the idea that you could take an existing mechanism, tweak it and alter it slightly and rebirth it. Maybe I made a complete pig's ear of that. Maybe you know, in fact, of much better ways of improving the roll and move mechanism. And if you do, why don't you share that with me? Drop me a comment, I would greatly appreciate it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you like this kind of content and want to see more, consider subscribing to the channel because, quite frankly, every sub helps. Until next time though guys, look after yourselves, try to play a few more games if you can. That's bordering on someone else's tagline, so I want to be careful there. But yeah, just look after yourselves.